You'll notice also that part of the pivot table disappeared. That's because my cursor is outside of the data. If I click in the data, it will reappear again. So the field list is now one more time there. You'll also notice that on the bottom I have these 4 different boxes, and this provides us with an alternate way of selecting the items. In other words, I can drag the item down to each of the appropriate locations in order to obtain what I want to obtain. But since it is basically very, very similar, I will just stick to the way that we've been doing it at this point. Let's make a minor change. We look at the data and we say, well, maybe we really don't want to have both male and female. We would just like to see the results for the female. So we can click on the row label and we can filter it by unchecking male and click on OK, and there we go. Now we have the average of the female in the class, and obviously we can do the same thing for male. The point to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter whether we select the checkbox next to any of our choices before or after the other one. In other words, we could check or bring over gender first and then the exams second, or exam first and then the gender second. Excel will put it in its appropriate location, namely the text by the rows and the numeric in the column location. What's nice to see is that we can make a, if I can call it a mistake, and have Excel show us the result, and if we wish to change it, it's just a matter of 1 or 2 clicks in order to show the data in a different manner. Let's look at another pivot table with the other data that we brought in, namely the sales people who worked in different departments. This can serve as a refresher. We click on Create a Pivot Table. Let's look at the individual departments. We'll click on Department, and we notice all the departments are put in. And let's click on Sales. And lo and behold, we have the sum of the sales for each of the departments. Now again, it's not formatted. We can change that later, but let's just see what we have at this point. So we can see just by a cursory view which have the most sales, which department. Let's change the numbers into appropriate format, which will be dollars and cents. Let's highlight the data. By doing what we did in the previous example, we change the amounts now to whole dollars. Let's take a look at the individual salespeople in each department to see how they did. So we can click on the last name, and lo and behold, we see the breakdown, how much each one brought in. Let's say we'd like to highlight the maximum sales in each of the departments, in children's and cosmetics. Now we can see just by looking at it that 29,000 was the highest. Let's see how an Excel pivot report can do that for us, and we can now extend this to even a much larger spreadsheet to see and appreciate how it can work. We can just click on average sales and we change it to max. And watch what happens. Let's move this over so we have a better view of it. And remember, we saw the 29,000 was the max. Let's click on it to see what Excel does. And sure enough, maximum sales 29,000, which refers to that value. And if we go further down, we see as well cosmetics 12,444. That was the individual here, Henning. And we can go further down and see the rest as well. We have another option to make the data more appealing. In this example, what I did is I checked off classification, and what it did, it put in the classification within the departments. But it's hard to see all the results. You just have to scroll down, and it's really difficult to see. One of the options we have is to move the data from a vertical to a horizontal position. What I mean by that is, let's click on this classification PT1, right click, and we go down to where it says move, and we look at one of the choices. It gives us a choice to move classification to columns. Now let's just see what happens. When we do that, all the classifications are now in columns, and it is much easier to see the results. If we're not happy with this and we want to go back the way it was, we can easily do that as well. We can just click on one of the classifications and go down to move, and one more time we can go down to move it to rows. So it involves a little bit of experimentation to see really which is the best way that it will appear to you and to your clients or people that are interested in seeing these results. As I said earlier, we can accomplish the same pivot table by doing dragging fields. I'll just illustrate with one. If we take a look at the department, for example, and drag this down to the row label, you'll see automatically we have the rows inserted. And we can do the same thing with the sales. And we have to be careful where we put it. And we put it down to sum up the values, and there it is the way we had it initially. There is so much more we can do. Let me demonstrate one other item for you at this point. If we click in our data area, we notice on top it says pivot table tools. Let's say we'd like to get a chart of this, maybe some sort of graph. If I click on the tools, we have a whole slew of items that we can deal with, and one of them is pivot chart. If we click on pivot chart, we have a whole bunch of choices where we can express the information. Let's click on one of them. This time we'll choose a column chart. Double click, and let's see what we have. Well, it's one way to express the data, where we see the furniture is way high compared to the others, and it does impress us by seeing it this way, possibly more than it was the other way. But as you can see, there are many choices that we can select, changing color and other things as well, switching rows and columns, which might be of interest to you, and of course going back to change the chart type. What we should remember from all the various combinations that we did is that a pivot table is a very useful interactive view of worksheet data, and it gives us the ability to summarize the data. It gives us the ability to rotate, to choose rows and columns, and it is really up to us, if we know how we'd like it to look, to be able to use the power of Excel and the pivot table and pivot chart to express that to our clients.